Wait, who are you? Why are you changing the locks on my house? Please. I didn't book any service like this. Ma'am, I have a work order right here with everything clearly written down. I don't know anything about this. On the morning of my cataract surgery, I thought the hardest part of my day would just be dealing with brief, blurry vision after waking up from anesthesia. But about 30 minutes before they wheeled me into the operating room, my phone rang. The man on the line introduced himself as a locksmith. He politely called to confirm whether I still needed all the exterior locks on my house replaced that afternoon. I told him he definitely had the wrong number. After a long pause, he said softly, "Ma'am, this request was booked by your son." He hesitated before continuing. "He told me you wouldn't be home all day today." In that single second, it hit me. Someone was waiting for me to finish surgery and come home, only to find myself locked out of the house where I had lived with my late husband for 40 years. If you've ever trusted someone unconditionally just because they were family, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. People always assume betrayal arrives like a deafening thunderstorm, loud enough to make everyone run for cover. But that isn't how it happened in my life. Mine came like a quiet autumn afternoon in Ohio. So silent I almost mistook it for peace and quiet. My name is Marjorie Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, a retired elementary school librarian. Until a few weeks ago, I naively thought I knew exactly who I could trust in this world. For nearly 40 years, I've lived in a 2-story white colonial house on Maple Grove Lane in Columbus, Ohio. My late husband, Robert, and I bought it when our son, Ethan, was only 3 years old. Back then, the neighborhood was still under construction. There were more construction trucks than trees on the street, and every family planted a maple sapling in their front yard. Today, the maple tree in my yard grows higher than the roof. Sometimes I sit on the porch swing and think about how that tree witnessed every major chapter of my life. It watched Ethan learn to ride a bike, watched Robert teach him how to throw a baseball. It saw countless birthday parties, graduations, Christmas mornings, and quiet summer nights when neighbors gathered with iced lemonade, while the kids chased fireflies across the lawn. It also watched the ambulance take Robert away for the very last time. 7 years ago, passing of my husband changed everything. Robert wasn't just my husband. He had been my best friend since college. We met at Ohio State University, where he studied civil engineering, and I studied education. I was impulsive, while he was endlessly patient. I was emotional, while he was deeply organized. If I kept birthday cards because they held memories, Robert kept every appliance manual because he firmly believed you never knew when you might need it. I used to tease him about it, but now, I only wish I had laughed less and thanked him more. After his service, this big house became suffocatingly quiet. For months, I still habitually brewed 2 cups of coffee every morning, before suddenly remembering I only needed 1. I would often call upstairs to ask if he wanted pancakes, only to realize seconds later that no one would ever answer me up there again. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it hits you while folding laundry, or when an old song plays at the grocery store, or simply because of an empty chair across the dinner table. Eventually, I learned to live with the silence, not because it got easier, but because it became familiar. Thankfully, I wasn't entirely alone. After Robert passed, Ethan started coming over much more often. At first, my heart was full of gratitude. He would stop by after work carrying takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. He'd fix the kitchen faucet before I even noticed it was leaking. Every winter, he cleared the snow from my driveway. He replaced the batteries in my smoke detectors and mowed the lawn whenever my arthritis flared up. Whenever friends from church asked how I was doing living alone, I would smile proudly and say, "My son takes wonderful care of me." And I believed every word of it. Ethan worked as an operations manager for a regional logistics company. He always seemed busy, constantly answering emails or taking calls. He lived about 25 minutes away with his wife, Lauren, and their teenage daughter, Sophie. Lauren was a pleasant woman, polite even if not overly affectionate. She never made me feel unwelcome. On holidays, she'd bring over homemade banana bread, or invite me over for a big Sunday dinner once a month or so. We weren't extraordinarily close, but we got along just fine. Looking back now, I wonder how much she actually knew. Or maybe, just like I trusted my son, she simply trusted her husband. Gradually, Ethan began helping me with things beyond household repairs. "Mom," he said one afternoon, "you shouldn't have to drive across town just to deposit a check." So, he taught me how to use online banking. A few months later, he suggested keeping track of all my passwords in case of an emergency. "It'll just make everything easier," he said at the time. It sounded completely sensible. Next, he helped me renew my driver's license online. Later, he filed my electronic tax returns. Then, he insisted on keeping digital copies of all my insurance documents on his computer. Every favor seemed so harmless, every decision so practical. After all, everyone tells older folks they need help keeping up with the digital age. I never wanted to be that stubborn, elderly woman who refused help, so whenever Ethan offered, I thanked him. What I didn't realize was that with every favor, he was taking away another piece of my independence, another password, another account, another signature, another document. No single request was big enough to raise alarm, but when put together, they formed a complete picture. Nancy Collins, my neighbor of 36 years, noticed these subtle shifts long before I did. Nancy and I had been through almost everything together. We raised our kids on the same street, celebrated each other's anniversaries, and buried our husbands less than 18 months apart. One warm spring afternoon, we sat on my porch drinking iced tea, watching robins hop across the lawn. Nancy glanced over at Ethan's SUV parked in my driveway. "He's been coming around a lot lately." I smiled. "I'm very lucky." She nodded slowly. "You are." She paused for a second. "I just hope he's coming over because you genuinely need help, not because he thinks you do." I laughed. "Oh, Nancy," she didn't laugh back. "I'm serious, Marjorie." I looked at her in surprise. "Why would you say that?" Before answering, she stirred the melting ice in her glass with her straw. "While you were at church, I saw him walking around your house. He spent a long time inspecting the exterior." I shrugged. "Maybe he was checking the gutters." "Maybe," her voice remained gentle. "But when Robert used to look at this house, his eyes were full of pride." She stopped for a moment. "When Ethan looks at it, it's like he's running numbers in his head." That comment bothered me for just a second before I brushed it aside. Nancy had always been protective. Maybe losing her husband made her overly cautious. I refused to believe my son had any hidden motives. Besides, Ethan frequently reminded me how much he wanted me to stay independent. "You belong here, Mom," he would often say. "This house is full of Dad's memory." Whenever he said those things, I felt deeply reassured. How could someone aiming to take my home speak with such warmth? Around that time, Ethan casually asked if I still kept the original deed to the house. He explained he was organizing some family records, saying, "In case of an emergency, it's smart to know where all the important papers are." Again, it sounded reasonable. I led him to the fireproof safe in Robert's old study. He didn't ask to open it, just nodded thoughtfully. A week later, he asked if I had made photocopies of the property documents. I told him I wasn't sure. He smiled and said, "I'll make a set of copies one of these days. It'll save everyone a lot of trouble later if we ever need them." Planning ahead, it sounded so much like something Robert would do. That night, as I locked the front door before bed, I remember feeling incredibly blessed. I had a comfortable home, a loving family, my faith to carry me through hard times, wonderful neighbors, and enough savings to live comfortably without stressing over every penny. If someone had stood in my kitchen that night and whispered, "The biggest threat to your future isn't a stranger, it's the son you trust most," I would have smiled politely and told them they were mistaken. I had no idea that every quiet act of kindness I accepted over the past 2 years was slowly becoming the foundation for the most painful betrayal I would ever experience. The first person to suggest I get cataract surgery wasn't my doctor, it was my son. Even now, realizing that makes my stomach turn. Ouch. About 6 months before everything happened, I was sitting in the living room reading my favorite mystery novel when I noticed I was holding the book farther away than usual. The edges of the print seemed soft and blurry, as if someone had blown warm air onto the page. I thought it was just bad lighting. A week later at Sunday service, I struggled to read the hymn numbers. Ouch. At night, oncoming headlights began blooming into bright halos in my field of vision. I made an appointment with the optometrist, thinking I just needed a stronger prescription. However, after running a few tests, the doctor gave me a reassuring smile. "Marjorie, this is actually good news." I gave a nervous chuckle. I've never heard a doctor start a sentence like that. He laughed softly. "Ouch. You have cataracts in both eyes. It's extremely common at your age, and it's one of the safest procedures we perform." He patiently explained everything. The cloudiness wasn't permanent, and recovery was usually quick. Most patients regretted not doing it sooner. Driving home, I felt a wave of relief. It was just a small issue with a clear fix, nothing more. That evening, Ethan called as usual. "Ouch. Mom, how did the doctor's appointment go today?" "They said it's cataracts." There was a short silence on the line. "What did the doctor recommend?" "Eventually, surgery." "Eventually as in over the next few months?" His quick response caught me off guard. "I wouldn't wait that long, it's not an emergency." "Mom, your vision affects every part of your life." "I know, you could fall." "Ouch. I'm managing fine for now." "You shouldn't just be managing." His concern sounded so genuine that I actually felt guilty for hesitating. "I'll think about it." "No." His voice softened. "We'll get it scheduled. I'll help you through it." I smiled. "You're always helping me." The following Saturday, Ethan showed up with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. Ouch. He spread a pile of brochures across the kitchen table. I looked into the best eye centers in Columbus. I blinked. "You already checked?" I had some free time. He had highlighted surgeons, compared patient reviews, printed insurance details, and even written phone numbers on sticky notes. I couldn't help but laugh. "You did more homework than I did." He grinned. Ouch. Dad always said thorough planning prevents problems. Hearing him mention Robert warmed my heart. In that moment he sounded so much like his father, organized, prepared, dependable. By the next Monday, while I was watering flowers on the porch, Ethan called again. "I took an early lunch break," he said. "What for?" "I called the clinic." "You did what?" "They have an opening next month." Ouch. "Ethan, I already set up the appointment for you." "You scheduled surgery?" "You can cancel whenever you want." I sighed. "You really don't like waiting, do you?" "I don't like unnecessary risks." There it was again, his care, his sense of duty, his devotion. Every word he spoke sounded entirely like what a loving son would say. I accepted the appointment. Ouch. When I mentioned it to Nancy later that week, she raised an eyebrow. That moved fast. Ethan helped set it up, I figured. She didn't sound particularly impressed. "You sound skeptical." She gave a polite smile. "I just hope he isn't making all your decisions for you. He's just helping." "I know, but there's a difference." I laughed. "You worry too much." Ouch. Nancy looked out toward the street and replied calmly, "Maybe. But sometimes, older folks confuse being loved with letting someone else take control of their life." I changed the subject, not wanting to argue. Nancy had always been fiercely independent and probably thought everyone should refuse help. But I wasn't like that. I was grateful to have family around. The weeks flew by. Ouch. Ethan accompanied me to every pre-op checkup. He sat with me in the waiting room, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. Sometimes he remembered minor details I had forgotten. One afternoon, the nurse asked who would be driving home after the procedure. "I will," Ethan answered immediately. "And who will stay with you the first night?" "Also me." The nurse smiled approvingly. "Ouch. You have a wonderful son." I looked at Ethan with pride. I really do. Looking back, that phrase replayed in my mind like a persistent nightmare. As the surgery date approached, Ethan became even more attentive. He stopped by almost every night. He replaced a few burned-out light bulbs, reorganized my medicine cabinet, and even bought brighter lamps for the living room. Porch. To give you better lighting after surgery, he explained. Every gesture seemed so thoughtful without a single red flag. Until one evening when he asked a question with casual indifference. Mom, where do you keep your spare house keys? I looked up from my crossword puzzle. In the kitchen drawer. Do you still have all 3 sets? I think so. He walked over and pulled the drawer open. Porch. Here they are. He held them up. Mind if I borrow a set? What do you need a spare key for? In case you're sleeping after surgery so I can let myself in. You'll probably be half groggy. I expect I'll be quite awake. I know. Porch. But what if you need me to pick up a prescription, buy groceries, fetch the mail, or let a visiting nurse in? Everything he said sounded flawless and completely logical. I handed him a set. Then, he paused. Actually, what? It might be easier if I hold on to both spare sets. I smiled. Are you planning on losing one? He laughed too. Just planning ahead. Porch. Without overthinking it, I handed him the second set. After all, he had never given me a reason not to trust him. A few days later, my daughter-in-law, Lauren, called. Hi, Marjorie. Great to hear your voice. We're so glad you're finally getting the surgery done. I put it off too long. Ethan was really worried. I know, he's been talking about it constantly lately. Porch. Constantly? That caught my attention. Oh yes. He wants everything to run perfectly. Her voice sounded completely sincere. Just like me, she fully believed Ethan was simply a dedicated, loving son. Before hanging up, she added something that sounded sweet at the time. We're making all sorts of plans so you won't have to worry about a thing after surgery. I smiled. You two are spoiling me. Porch. You deserve it. After ending the call, my heart was filled with warmth. At my age, how many people have children willing to rearrange their busy lives for them? That Sunday at church, Pastor Samuel Brooks noticed me rubbing my eyes. Surgery this week? Wednesday morning. We'll keep you in our prayers. Thank you. Is Ethan driving you? Of course. The pastor smiled. Porch. He asked everyone to pray for you. I was pleasantly surprised. He did? Yes, he brought it up at the men's breakfast meeting. I felt tears well up in my eyes. How blessed I was to have a son asking the congregation to pray for his mother's recovery, a daughter-in-law preparing meals, and a community that cared. I felt surrounded by love. Porch. After the service, as everyone chatted outside in the bright June sunlight, Nancy walked with me to the parking lot. Ready for this? I think so. She watched Ethan loading my folding chair into the trunk. He certainly has everything organized. That's just how he is. Nancy hesitated. Marjorie, if anything feels off. I smiled. Nothing will go wrong. She didn't smile back. Porch. Promise me you'll call if something comes up. I squeezed her hand. I promise. The night before surgery, Ethan brought over homemade chicken soup that Lauren made. He insisted on checking every room to make sure my overnight bag was packed. He slipped my medication list into the front pocket. Then, he asked one final question. What time should I pick you up tomorrow? Porch. The clinic wants me there by 7 a.m. Then I'll be here right at 6 a.m. He looked around the living room once more. His eyes lingered on family photos, the fireplace, Robert's old recliner, and the staircase. At the time, I thought he was just admiring the home he grew up in. Now I realize he was looking at the house with a completely different perspective. Porch. Before leaving, he gave me a tight hug. Don't worry about a thing tomorrow, Mom. I'll take care of everything. Standing in the doorway, I watched his SUV disappear around the corner. Those words echoed in my mind. I'll take care of everything. As I locked the front door and walked upstairs to bed, I was still smiling, convinced I had raised the kind of son every mother dreams of. Porch. I had no idea that while I was praying to regain clear sight the next day, Ethan was quietly setting a trap, one that relied entirely on me being completely blind to the truth. I barely slept the night before the procedure, though not because I feared the surgery itself. Modern cataract operations are routine. Orch. My eye doctor had explained the procedure in such detail that I felt I could recite it by memory. They remove the cloudy lens, replace it with a clear artificial one, and within a few weeks, the world appears brighter than it has in years. No, what kept me awake was something far less dramatic. I kept thinking about how Robert would have teased me for being so nervous. Orch. He had a way of making tough days feel ordinary. If they're fixing your eyes, he used to joke whenever either of us needed new glasses, make sure they don't upgrade your ability to spot my bad habits. I smiled to myself in the dark. Even 7 years after his passing, I could still hear his voice in moments like this. At 5 a.m. on Wednesday, my alarm went off. The house was dead silent. Orch. Outside my bedroom window, the first light of dawn painted the Columbus sky a soft gray. I washed carefully with the antibacterial soap the surgical center recommended, then dressed in comfortable sweatpants and a light blue cardigan, remembering they warned the operating room might be chilly. Before leaving the room, I paused at the photo frame on my dresser. Orch. In it, Robert stood under the maple tree in our yard one autumn, hands shoved into the pockets of his flannel jacket, smiling at the camera. I picked it up. "Wish me luck," I whispered. For a brief second, that familiar grief washed over me again. Then I set the frame down and walked downstairs. At precisely 6:10 a.m., Ethan's SUV pulled into the driveway, punctual as always. Porch. Before I even reached the door, he was walking up the porch steps. "Good morning, Mom. You're up early. I wanted to make sure we weren't rushing." Without asking, he picked up my overnight bag. "Ready? As ready as I'll ever be." He offered a warm smile. "You'll be seeing clearly before lunch." Porch. On the drive to Riverside Surgical Center, Ethan made small talk about traffic, the weather forecast, and a baseball game he watched the night before. I was surprised by how relaxed he seemed. Maybe he was trying to keep my mind off things, or maybe he truly believed there was nothing to worry about. Either way, I was grateful for the conversation. Porch. When we arrived, he parked close to the entrance and insisted on walking me inside. The waiting area smelled faintly of brewed coffee and disinfectant, with soft instrumental music playing from hidden speakers. The receptionist greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Whitfield, that's me. We've been expecting you." A few minutes later, a nurse called my name. Porch. "Only one family member is allowed in the pre-op area," she explained. "I'll stay until she goes in," Ethan replied. The nurse smiled. "You have a good son." I looked at Ethan with quiet pride. "I really do." Once I was prepped, Ethan stood up. "I'm going to grab a cup of coffee." "Go ahead, take your time." "Need anything?" "No, I'm fine. I'll be back in a few minutes." Porch. As he disappeared through the automatic doors, I leaned back against the pillow. Nurses moved efficiently between patients, someone laughed down the hall, and a nearby TV played the morning news quietly. Everything felt completely normal. Just then, my phone vibrated inside my purse. Normally, I don't answer unknown numbers, especially before a medical procedure. But for a reason I still can't explain, I pressed answer. "Hello?" A pleasant male voice responded immediately. "Good morning. Is this Mrs. Marjorie Whitfield?" "Speaking." "Great. My name is Thomas Reed from Reed Security Locks. I'm calling to confirm if we're still set for our 11:00 a.m. appointment today to replace all exterior locks on your residence." I frowned. "I'm sorry. Replace the locks?" Porch. "I think you have the wrong number." There was a brief pause on the line. He sounded confused. "Is the address 1748 Maple Grove Lane?" "Yes. And you are Mrs. Marjorie Whitfield?" "Yes." Another pause. "This was booked by your son." "My son?" He identified himself as Ethan Whitfield. My muscles went rigid. "I don't understand. You said he requested all the locks on my home be changed today?" Porch. "I never authorized that." Thomas didn't answer immediately. When he spoke again, his tone was far more cautious. "Ma'am, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you at home right now?" "No, I'm at Riverside Surgical Center." Another silence followed, longer this time. Finally, he let out a slow breath. He told me you wouldn't be home all day or into the evening. Torch. I'm about to have cataract surgery, I see. My heart skipped a beat. You knew? Your son explained. He said your vision was severely declining. I sat up straight. What exactly did he tell you? Thomas lowered his voice. He said you were experiencing memory loss issues. My mouth went dry. He claimed your doctor advised changing the locks because you've lost your keys multiple times. Torch. I stared at the wall opposite me. Though my vision was blurred, my focus was pinned. I have never lost my keys. He also stated he had legal authorization to approve the work because you'd be unable to handle things after anesthesia. I heard the rustle of paper on his end. I specifically asked him if you were aware of this booking. What did Ethan say? Torch. He said discussing it beforehand would only confuse and upset you. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Nurses kept passing my bed, monitors beeped, and someone laughed nearby. Yet everything around me suddenly felt distant, almost unreal. I've never spoken to you before today. I know. Thomas sounded genuinely uncomfortable. Torch. During our call, something just didn't sit right with me. What do you mean? I've been a locksmith for 27 years. I've learned to trust my instincts. He paused. He seemed unusually urgent. Urgent, he wanted the job completely finished before you returned home. A cold chill ran down my spine. He explicitly asked how fast we could get it done. Torch. I forced myself to keep my breathing steady. What else? Thomas hesitated. I probably shouldn't say. Please tell me. He asked if we could install keypad locks immediately, so only he would have access to program the entry codes. For several seconds I couldn't speak. A single thought echoed in my mind. Mr. Reed, I'm here. Torch. If you hadn't called me just now, would you have gone through with it as scheduled? I closed my eyes. I pictured coming home from surgery with blurry vision, unable to open my front door, my belongings potentially being moved, and my own son standing inside holding the new keys. Thomas spoke gently. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm still listening. How would you like me to handle this? Torch. That simple question changed everything. I forced myself to think clearly. If I confronted Ethan right now, he would deny it. If I canceled outright, he would know someone tipped me off. No, I needed him to believe his plan was moving forward as intended. Taking a deep breath, I kept my voice low. Mr. Reed, I need your help. I'm listening. I want you to delay the appointment. Understood. Torch. Should I notify your son? No. Tell him an emergency delayed your crew, and mention nothing about our conversation. You have my word. I felt tears welling up. Not from fear, but from relief and gratitude. Why are you helping me? He answered without hesitation. Because my own mother is 74. If she were in this position, I'd hope someone would do the same for her. Torch. Before hanging up, he added quietly, Mrs. Whitfield, whatever happens next, please don't face it alone. Just as I disconnected, a nurse approached my bed. We're ready for you now. I slid the phone back into my purse, my hands shaking slightly. Across the hallway, Ethan walked back through the automatic doors holding a fresh cup of coffee, carrying the exact same smile he had all morning. Torch. He had no idea that long before I entered the operating room, his scheme had already begun to crumble. I smiled back at him, pretending for the very first time in my 68 years to be completely oblivious. The procedure itself took less than half an hour. Torch. I only remember the bright surgical lights overhead, calm voices echoing in the room, and the reassuring tone of my surgeon explaining each step before proceeding. There was no pain, just a strange awareness that something significant was shifting. When it was over, a nurse gently wheeled me to the recovery area. Everything went smoothly, Mrs. Whitfield, she said with a warm smile. Torch. Your vision will feel a bit cloudy today, which is completely normal. I thanked her, but my mind was far away from my eyesight. I was thinking about my house, about Ethan, and about that phone call from the locksmith. I rested quietly in recovery for nearly an hour while nurses monitored my blood pressure and went over discharge instructions. Torch. Ethan sat beside my bed, looking every bit like the devoted son everyone assumed he was. He asked thoughtful questions about my post-op medications and carefully packed my sunglasses and eye shield into my bag. Watching him perform was chilling. His act was seamless. If I hadn't taken that phone call earlier, I would have believed every smile, every gesture, every word. Finally, the nurse cleared me to leave. Ethan helped me to my feet. "Take it easy, Mom. I've got you." I leaned lightly on his arm, not because I needed the support, but to keep him convinced that my trust remained unbroken. Outside, despite the protective shield over my eyes, the bright June sunlight was dazzling. Ethan opened the passenger door of his SUV. "Heading straight home?" I intentionally feigned hesitation. "Actually, the doctor recommended I rest somewhere quiet for a few hours before tackling the stairs at home." "I can stay with you there. I was thinking." I paused deliberately. "Maybe I'll rest at Nancy's house this afternoon." His expression shifted for just a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but after the locksmith's warning, I was watching every detail. "There's no need to bother Nancy." "Oh. She won't mind. I already mentioned the surgery to her. I can take care of you." I offered a gentle smile. "I know, but she insisted." He forced a smile back. "If that's what you want." The disappointment in his voice was barely perceptible. "Almost." As we drove through Columbus, I watched the familiar streets blur past my still cloudy vision. Everything looked softer than usual. Buildings melted into bright blocks of color, and traffic lights glowed like wet watercolor paints. The irony was hard to miss. My sight was still unfocused, but my head was clearer than it had ever been. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced at his phone. Sometimes he typed out a quick response, other times he frowned at the screen. Once the car's hands-free system rang and he hit ignore without a second thought. "Work stuff?" I asked. "Yeah, just a busy day," he said, his voice sounding distant. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed on the console again, with another text. He set his jaw, tapped out a rapid reply, and shoved the phone deep into his pocket. Things weren't going according to his plan. I was certain of it. When we pulled up to Nancy's house, she was already waiting on the porch. Before Ethan even brought the SUV to a complete stop, she was briskly walking down the driveway toward us. "Oh, Marjorie," she said, wrapping her arms around me with immense care. "How are you feeling? A little tired. You look good." I smiled softly. "I can barely see a thing. It'll come back slowly." Ethan carried my overnight bag up to Nancy's front door. "I'll come back and pick you up later tonight." "No need," Nancy interjected before I could say a word. "She's staying with me overnight." He looked taken aback. "Overnight?" "The doctor just suggested having someone around for a few hours." "I can take care of her." Nancy gave a polite, immovable smile. "So can I." For a second, neither of them said a word. Then Ethan gave a brief nod. "All right." He leaned down and kissed my forehead. "Call me if you need anything. I will." The moment his SUV disappeared down the street, Nancy closed the front door behind us. She didn't utter a single word until she had drawn every set of blinds tight. Then she turned around to face me. "What happened?" I took a deep breath. "A locksmith called me." Her eyes widened. "A locksmith?" I laid out everything. Every single detail. The phone call, the booking, the lie about me having memory issues, the plan to change the locks, and the calculating timing of it all. By the time I finished, Nancy's face had gone entirely pale. I knew something felt wrong. I should have pressed you harder. "No," she shook her head gently. "You trusted your son. I trusted the wrong person." She placed a warm hand over mine. "This isn't even the worst of it." "What do you mean?" "We don't have the whole picture yet." She was right. All we knew was that Ethan intended to change the locks. We still had no idea what else he had set in motion. Nancy glanced out the front window. "I'm going over to your house to check." "You don't need to do that." "I have to." Before I could argue, she had already grabbed her car keys. "If anyone asks, I'm just dropping off some soup. I'll only be 20 minutes. That was the longest 20 minutes of my entire life. I sat alone in Nancy's living room, listening to the steady ticking of her grandfather clock. Every passing second felt deafening. What if Ethan realized the locksmith never showed up? Porch. What if he postponed his plans? What if I had read the whole situation? What if there was some innocent explanation for all of it? Deep down, though, I already knew there wasn't one. At 3:37 p.m., Nancy rushed back through the front door. She wasn't carrying soup anymore. She was holding her phone, and all the color had drained from her face. Marjorie. My heart began to race. What is it? Porch. You need to sit down. I'm already sitting. She swallowed hard. They're over there. Who? Ethan. My throat tightened. And who else? A moving company. For several seconds, neither of us said a word. The only sound in the room was the heavy thudding of my own pulse. No. Nancy gave a slow nod. I'm so sorry, Marjorie. He hired professional movers. Porch. They're loading furniture onto a truck right now. My breathing hitched. My furniture? Yes. The dining room set, the guest room bed, boxes from the garage. I covered my mouth. No. Nancy unlocked her phone. I took photos. She handed the screen to me. Even with my vision still blurry, I could recognize the shapes. That was my front porch. A massive moving truck was backed up to it. Porch. Two uniformed movers were carrying Bert's antique oak rocking chair, the exact chair he used to sit in every Sunday morning to read the paper. Another photo showed my mother's china cabinet being wheeled down the path. A third photo captured a mountain of labeled cardboard boxes. Living room, master bedroom, kitchen, porch. Everything carefully sorted and packed, as if preparing for a complete liquidation. A wave of physical nausea washed over me. Then, Nancy opened a short video. The frame was slightly shaky, shot from inside her parked car. Ethan was standing on my front lawn, speaking with quiet confidence to the moving crew foreman. Porch. His voice wasn't crystal clear, but one phrase cut through the background noise with terrifying clarity. My mother won't be coming back today. The world felt like it stopped spinning. Not might not probably won't, but won't. As if the decision had already been finalized for me. Nancy reached into her purse. And there's this. She unfolded a piece of paper. Porch. I found this blowing across your driveway. I looked down, but because my pupils were still dilated, the text was a blur. Nancy read it aloud for me. Notice of voluntary property vacancy. Underneath that was another line, temporary placement plan prior to assisted living admission. I stared at her in disbelief. I never signed anything like that. I know. There's another page too. Porch. What page? Nancy showed me a photo of a document corner she snapped before it blew away. The bold header text at the very top made my blood run cold. Eviction coordination checklist. I couldn't catch my breath. Eviction. Not a relocation, not assistance, an eviction. My own son hadn't just planned to lock me out. Porch. He had orchestrated an entire operation to erase me from my own home while I was helpless in a surgical unit, naively believing he was taking care of me. Nancy quietly held my hand. What do we do now? For the first time since answering Thomas Reed's call, I stopped reacting like a frightened mother. Porch. Instead, I started thinking like the school librarian I had been for 40 years, tackling the problem step by step, page by page. I looked at Nancy, at those photos and at that video. Finally, 4 words came out of my mouth that neither of us expected to hear. We gather the evidence. Nancy gave a slow, solemn nod. The tears in my eyes vanished. Porch. In their place grew something far more potent. Absolute resolve. Ethan still assumed I was entirely in the dark about what he was doing, and I intended to let him enjoy that illusion just a little while longer. I didn't return home that night. Porch. For the first time in nearly 40 years, I slept somewhere else while strangers handled my personal belongings, all while my own son believed he was one step closer to taking everything Robert and I had built. My sleep was broken and restless. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that moving truck parked in front of my house. I saw Robert's rocking chair being pushed down the driveway. Porch. I heard Ethan's voice echoing, "My mother won't be coming back today." By 6 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting at Nancy's kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee in front of me. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "Not much." She pushed a plate of toast toward me. "You need to eat something." I really can't. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Orch. Then we're calling Michael right now. I nodded immediately. Michael Lawson had been our family attorney for nearly 25 years. Robert trusted him completely. After Robert passed, Michael handled the probate, updated my will, and checked in periodically to see if I needed anything. More than just an attorney, Michael was a trusted friend. At 8 a.m. sharp, Nancy dialed his office. Orch. To our surprise, Michael answered directly. Marjorie needs your help, Nancy said into the receiver. Something in her voice must have set off alarm bells. What's going on? It can't wait. I spoke up. Come to my office. I know you're still recovering from eye surgery, so I'll make special arrangements. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Porch. Michael's office sat inside a restored 2-story red brick building near downtown Columbus. The waiting room looked exactly as I remembered it. Leather armchairs, tall wooden bookshelves, framed pictures of the courthouse. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Michael came out to greet us himself. When he saw my face, his smile faded instantly. This isn't about your cataracts, is it? Porch. No. He led Nancy and me into a private conference room. Tell me everything. I started from the very beginning with Thomas Reed's phone call. Then I described the moving truck. Nancy showed him every photo and video clip on her phone. Michael watched in complete silence, taking careful notes without interrupting once. When the final video ended, he leaned back in his chair. Porch. Has Ethan ever discussed moving you out of your home? Never. Have you ever signed anything regarding an assisted living facility? Never. Did you authorize anyone to remove your personal property? No. He laced his fingers together. Good. I blinked. Good? Because that simplifies things, he nodded. Porch. If everything you've told me is accurate, your son may have created severe legal trouble for himself. My heart sank. I don't want him arrested. Michael looked me dead in the eye. Marjorie, I know he is your son. But right now, I need you to think like the legal owner of that property, not like a mother. Separating those two roles felt far more painful than I ever expected. Porch. Michael opened a yellow legal pad. Let's build a timeline. Together, we reconstructed every significant event. The surgery scheduling, Thomas's call, the arrival of the movers, the photos, the documents. Once finished, Michael circled 3 specific points in time. These are critical. Why? Porch. First, your son claimed authority to approve structural alterations to your home, he said, drawing a circle around the note. Second, he appears to have told outsiders you suffer from memory impairment. He drew another circle. Third, he tapped the photos. He began removing your assets without your consent. Silence settled over the room. Porch. Nancy finally asked the question neither of us wanted to hear. Is it fraud? Michael didn't answer right away. It touches on several potential legal violations. But before we draw conclusions, he stood up. I need proof. Real evidence, not assumptions. He walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder neatly labeled with my name. Porch. Let's start with your estate planning documents. He spread several pages across the conference table. These are the last documents you legally updated after Robert passed away. He pointed to my signature. Recognize this? Of course. And this one? Yes. Then, he placed another page beside them. This was submitted electronically 3 months ago. I frowned. I've never seen that before. Porch. Exactly. My name was typed on the document, and right below it was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. At first glance, it seemed genuine. Then I leaned in closer. Something felt off. That letter M? I pointed to the stroke. What about it? Whenever I write an M, I always start with a small loop at the bottom. Michael offered a thin smile. I noticed that too. Porch. This one doesn't have it. He placed a magnifying glass over the page. The pressure patterns don't match either. Someone forged this. I can't make a formal declaration yet, but I'm prepared to say it warrants deeper scrutiny. He opened another folder. This document was used to request information from Senior Housing Resources. I never requested that. I know. Another page. Porch. Authorization to discuss housing placement. And another. Permission to communicate with long-term care facilities. I never signed any of these. Michael nodded. They were never finalized, but someone started the paperwork. Nancy looked appalled. He was setting everything up in advance. Michael didn't deny it. Instead, he picked up another sheet. This page concerns me the most. Arch. At the top, printed in bold, were the words, Statement of Intent. The document claimed I intended to voluntarily downsize because maintaining my house had become physically and mentally overwhelming. I felt heat rush to my face. I never said those things. I know. Michael pushed the page closer to me. Look at the date. I peered down, then frowned. Arch. That's 3 weeks before I even saw the eye doctor, precisely. Before anyone ever suggested surgery, he nodded slowly. Which means long before cataracts became an excuse, someone was already planning this. A cold shudder ran through me. Cataract surgery hadn't inspired Ethan's plan. It had simply provided him with the perfect window of opportunity. Arch. Michael continued reviewing files for nearly an hour, insurance policies, property tax records, draft power of attorney forms, emergency contact updates. Most were legitimate, but several had been drafted without ever being completed. Suddenly, he stopped flipping pages. His expression shifted entirely. What is it? I asked. He stared silently at one specific document. Nancy leaned forward. Arch, what did you find? Michael didn't answer right away. He removed his reading glasses. This. He tapped the bottom of the page. Is impossible. My heart rate spiked. What? The witness signature. I followed his finger. Below my signature line was another signature. Witnessed by Charles Donnelly. The name sounded familiar. Then it hit me. Charles, our longtime neighbor. Michael nodded. Arch. When did he pass away? Last November. Exactly. A dead silence fell over the room. Charles Donnelly had passed away from a stroke 8 months ago. Robert and I both attended his funeral, and I remembered bringing a casserole over for his widow. Yet his signature was clearly stamped on a document allegedly signed just 6 weeks ago. Nancy covered her mouth. Oh my goodness. Arch. Michael closed the folder with a firm thud. This changes everything. I stared at him. How? Because oversights happen, and misunderstandings occur. But dead men do not sign legal documents. His voice remained eerily calm. If someone submitted paperwork bearing the signature of a deceased witness, he looked straight at me. We are no longer dealing with a misunderstanding. Arch. We are looking at fraud. For several long minutes, no one said a word. Finally, I asked the question that had been weighing on my mind since the locksmith's call. Michael. Yes? How could Ethan possibly think he would get away with this? Michael sighed. People under immense pressure often convince themselves they are smarter than everyone else. Arch. He likely assumed no one would ever audit these files. I looked down at the old estate folder Robert had kept years ago. A sudden thought flashed through my mind. Michael. Yes, Robert always kept duplicates of everything. Michael slowly smiled. He certainly did. He used to say, I finished the thought for him, paper remembers what people forget. He nodded. Arch. If Robert left records behind, they might end up being your strongest protection. For the first time since walking into the hospital, I felt something other than dread. It was hope. Somewhere in our house, hidden within the archives Robert had meticulously organized over decades, there might be conclusive evidence that could dismantle Ethan's whole scheme. Arch. I realized we weren't just searching for proof anymore. We were looking for what my husband had prepared for me long before any of us knew I would need it. Leaving Michael's office, I expected to feel exhausted. Instead, I felt a strange sense of focus. Fear had carried me through the first 24 hours after Thomas Reed's call. Now, something else took its place. Purpose. Arch. Michael insisted I stay at Nancy's until he determined the exact legal steps to take. He warned me not to confront Ethan, not to return home alone, and not to reveal that I knew about the forged documents. Our biggest advantage, he said before we left, is that Ethan still thinks he's in complete control. Arch. I remembered Robert saying almost the exact same thing years ago while teaching Ethan chess. The player who thinks he's already won is usually the player who stops watching the board. Ethan was 10 back then, and he hated losing. Robert just smiled and calmly took 3 of his pieces over the next 5 moves. That memory stayed with me all afternoon. Maybe my husband had been quietly preparing me for this fight all along, without either of us knowing it at the time. Back at Nancy's, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded relaxed. "How are your eyes feeling today?" "A bit sore." "That's normal." "Can you read all right?" "Not yet." It's uncomfortable to focus, still very blurry. I intentionally spoke a little slower than usual, matching the narrative he so desperately wanted to believe. "Sorry to hear that. The doctor said recovery takes time." "I'm sure it does," he hesitated. "Have you thought any more about staying at our place?" "I don't want to be a burden." "How could you be a burden?" "Trying to handle things on your own just doesn't make sense." I nearly laughed aloud. His concern sounded almost rehearsed. "I'll think about it." "All right. Maybe I'll swing by to see you tomorrow." "I'd like that." After hanging up, Michael looked up from his notepad. He didn't ask about the house. No. He wants you focused on your health so you won't ask questions. Precisely. On Saturday afternoon, Ethan arrived at Nancy's house carrying flowers, fresh soup, and a large bag of groceries. To anyone watching, he was the picture-perfect son visiting his recovering mother. After letting him in, Nancy quietly stepped back into the kitchen, just as Michael had instructed. The attorney himself was hiding in an upstairs guest room, silently listening in. Ohio law allows conversation recording as long as one party consents, and I had fully given that consent. Everything said from this point forward would be preserved as evidence. Ethan embraced me carefully. "You look tired. I haven't been sleeping well." I figured. He sat beside me on the couch. "I've been worried about you." "I know." For the first few minutes, we made small talk about my eye drops, friends from church, and the weather. Then Ethan subtly shifted the topic. "I drove through your neighborhood yesterday." "Oh? There's a lot of construction around there. Have you noticed?" I thought to myself. Here it comes. I was thinking maybe it's time to consider a different lifestyle. I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "You've been there a long time. Maintaining that house is getting harder. I'm managing fine for now." His tone remained patient, gentle, almost persuasive. "You deserve an easier life. I love my house, I know, but what if there's a better option?" I looked down at my hands. "Like what? A smaller apartment? A retirement community? Somewhere with fewer responsibilities?" I deliberately frowned. "I've never wanted any of those things." "You didn't want cataract surgery either, but you acknowledged it was necessary." Fascinating. He was attempting to link the two decisions, medical and residential, as if one naturally followed the other. I don't see those as the same thing. They're both about making life simpler. A stretch of silence settled between us. Then Ethan reached into his briefcase. "I actually brought some things over." He pulled out a thin folder. "I know your vision isn't fully back, so I'll walk you through it. These are just some printed forms, exactly as Michael had predicted. Temporary housing authorization, property maintenance agreement, emergency residential assistance." The titles sounded completely harmless, helpful, and responsible. "I don't understand." "These are just administrative forms, in case you decide to stay with us while recovering. I don't need to sign papers to stay at my son's house." He offered a soft laugh. "You don't, but insurance companies like having documentation." I reached for the papers, intentionally squinting. "I'm sorry, I really can't make out the words on this." "That's fine. I'll summarize it for you." Which was precisely what Michael wanted him to do. Ethan began explaining each page, or rather, his version of it. "The first form just lets me coordinate maintenance on your house." Maintenance, not occupancy. "The second allows me to collect your mail." "The third is just in case repairs are needed." Every explanation sounded thoroughly reasonable, yet not a single one matched the actual documents Michael had examined earlier. I trust you. Those words tasted like poison coming out of my mouth, because a small part of me still desperately wished they were true. Ethan gave a warm smile. I know. Then, he pushed a pen toward me. Maybe, George, you could sign these now. I picked up the pen and deliberately paused. My eyes. I can't even see the signature line clearly. I'll show you where. He leaned in too close. His finger rested right on the line. Upstairs, the recorder picked up every word. I don't feel right signing something I can't read. It's fine. I've already explained everything. George. I know, but Robert always said, I trailed off. Said what? He always told me never to sign anything without reading it first. For the first time, a flash of irritation crossed Ethan's face. Dad trusted me too. That statement hung in the air, quiet, sharp, and cutting. I trust you too. Then just sign it. An edge of pressure crept into his voice. Just a hint, but enough. George. I set the pen down slowly. I'd rather wait until my vision comes back. He let out a sigh. Mom, it's just temporary. Like I said, I'd rather wait. Another silence stretched on longer this time. Then Ethan leaned back. Do you know what worries me? What? I'm not sure you're capable of managing all this on your own anymore. George. My heart ached, not from the accusation, but from the chilling calm with which he delivered it. As people get older, he continued, they don't always realize when they need help. I still pay my own bills. Do you? Of course. You forgot the electric bill last month. I paid it late. I frowned. No, wait. He offered a patient smile. See? You don't even remember. George. I almost corrected him, but I caught myself. I remembered perfectly. I paid that bill 2 days early. Michael had already verified it through my bank records. Ethan hadn't made a mistake. He was planting doubt, constructing a false narrative. You've been forgetting things lately. I don't think so. Misplacing documents, leaving groceries in the trunk, repeating stories. George. I don't recall doing that. His eyes brightened slightly. That was the exact reaction he wanted. Self-doubt. He believed he was laying a foundation of evidence, brick by psychological brick. Finally, I looked at him and asked softly, Ethan. Yeah? Have you already decided I can't live alone anymore? For a single second, he froze. Just one heartbeat before recovering. Of course not. George. I just want what's best for you. Sometimes? He weighed his words carefully. Children have to make hard choices that parents might not fully understand. The room went completely silent. I could hear Nancy washing dishes in the kitchen and the clock ticking in the hallway. Then Ethan dropped off the sentence that changed everything. George. Honestly, I scheduled everything around your surgery because I knew you'd need support afterward. He cut himself off abruptly, perhaps realizing he had said too much. I looked up. What do you mean? Everything. His recovery was too quick. I just meant meals, rides, help around the house. But the damage was done. The recorder upstairs had captured the admission. George, he wasn't reacting to my surgery. He had built his plan around it. Exactly as Thomas Reed had warned, exactly as Michael had suspected. Ethan gathered the unsigned papers. Think it over. I will. I'll check on you next week. After he left, Michael came downstairs carrying the recorder, looking calmer than I had ever seen him. Did we get enough, Michael? He nodded. More than enough. George. What did he say? Michael rewound a section of the audio. Ethan's voice filled the room. Honestly, I scheduled everything around your surgery. Michael pressed stop. He tied the timeline together himself. No lawyer had to push, no investigator had to press. He offered it freely. I closed my eyes as a single tear slid down my cheek. George. Not because we were close to winning, but because hearing my son say those words completely erased the last shred of hope I had been holding on to. Up until that moment, a small part of me still wished it was all a terrible mistake. There was no mistake. My son hadn't made a reckless, split-second error. George. He had orchestrated a deliberate plan, centered entirely around a morning he knew I would be powerless to stop him, and now we had his own voice to prove it. By the following weekend, the truth had snowballed beyond any chance of containment. George. Not because Ethan confessed, and not because the police showed up, but because families have a way of sensing when something is wrong, even when no one says it out loud. For nearly a week, Ethan had been spreading his version of the story. I first heard about it from Nancy. We were having lunch when she took a call from another church friend. When she hung up, she looked troubled. "George, what's wrong?" I asked. "It seems Ethan has been talking." "To who?" "Just about everyone. What is he saying?" Nancy hesitated. "He's telling people your recovery is proving very difficult." "That's true enough. He's also saying your memory has become entirely unreliable." My stomach tightened. And that you're considering moving into an assisted living facility." "George." I stared down at my untouched sandwich. "So he's preparing everyone." Nancy nodded. "So when it happens, no one raises questions." Late that afternoon, Michael called. "I think it's time." "For what?" "A family meeting." I frowned. "Now?" "Yes. Before Ethan has more time to spin stories and control the narrative." "I don't want to fight." "You won't have to fight," Michael said calmly. "George, you just have to state the facts." The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at my house, not Ethan's. Michael insisted on that detail. "Ownership matters," he said. "When people step into your home, they are reminded whose house it actually is." By Sunday morning, my vision had cleared enough that I could comfortably read large print. The surgeon was thrilled with my progress. "George." Irony wasn't lost on me. The clearer my sight became, the harder it was to ignore the betrayal unfolding around me. Nancy drove me home early that morning. "George." Shortly after, Michael arrived carrying several neatly organized binders containing copies of every piece of evidence we had gathered. Photos, property records, hospital timelines, forged documents, the audio recording from Ethan's visit, and Thomas Reed's written statement, everything. He arranged the binders neatly across my dining room table. "I don't want to shock anyone, George. I just want to lay out the facts." At 1 p.m., the doorbell rang. My niece Rebecca arrived first, followed by my younger cousin Harold. A little later, Lauren arrived looking nervous, wrapping me in a tight hug. "How are your eyes?" "Getting better. I'm so glad." She looked around. "Where's Ethan?" "He said he'd be here." 10 minutes later, he walked in, wearing a confident, almost cheerful smile. "George." He kissed my cheek. "You look so much better." "I feel better. That's a relief." His eyes briefly drifted toward Michael. "I didn't realize we were having legal representation join us." Michael gave a polite smile. "I was invited." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "You're making this sound like some kind of major crisis." "It is a major crisis," Michael replied. "George." The living room gradually filled with close family, not dozens of people, just those closest to our inner circle. Enough for everyone to know each other, and enough for every spoken word to carry weight. Once everyone was seated, Michael stood up. "Thank you all for coming. I am not here today to argue, George. I am here because conflicting versions of events have started circulating." He glanced around the room. "Mrs. Whitfield asked me to help set the record straight." Before he could continue, Ethan spoke up. "I don't see why this needs to escalate to a legal level." Michael remained entirely calm. "Neither do I." "Then why are we here?" "Because the truth requires witnesses." "George." The room fell dead silent. Michael gave me a small nod. "Marjorie." I slowly stood up. My hands were trembling, not from fear but from heartbreak. "I asked you all here because I love this family. I never dreamed there would come a day when I would need to protect myself from my own son." Ethan let out an exaggerated sigh. "Mom, come on." I raised a hand, stopping him gently. "George, please let me finish." He leaned back into his chair, silent. I laid out the story from the beginning. The surgery, that phone call, Thomas Reed, the moving truck, the missing furniture, the forged documents. Nobody interrupted me. When I finished, Rebecca was visibly shocked. "Uncle Ethan, is that true?" He immediately shook his head. "No, Mom is confused." Michael quietly noted something down. "George." Ethan pressed on. "She just had eye surgery. She's under a lot of stress. And she's confused." The word confused hit me harder than I expected. That was the exact narrative he had been building all along. Harold frowned. "Marjorie doesn't sound confused to me." Ethan offered a patient smile. That's how memory issues start. They come and go. Lauren turned to him. George, you never mentioned memory issues. He looked momentarily uncomfortable. I didn't want to worry anyone, Michael finally interjected. Fascinating. He opened one of the binders. This document submitted to the housing agency states that Mrs. Whitfield is experiencing progressive memory decline. He distributed copies around the table. I've never seen this, Lauren whispered. George. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That was just preliminary, Michael nodded. So, you prepared housing documents as a precaution, without discussing them with your mother? I was just trying to help. Nancy spoke up for the first time. While Marjorie was in surgery, I personally watched movers clearing out her home. Every eye turned toward her. George. I took photos. She passed printed copies down the table. Silence descended. Rebecca stared at the images. Ethan, what is this? Mom asked me to organize her things. I did not, I answered calmly. He sighed again. Mom, don't you remember? I remember perfectly. You don't remember. I do. The tension in the room grew suffocating. Lauren looked back and forth between us. George. When exactly did she ask you to organize things? Ethan hesitated. I don't recall the exact date. You remember everything else, but not that? I just don't remember. Michael calmly placed another photo on the table. It showed a moving truck parked in my driveway. The hospital timestamp read 10:52 a.m. My surgery had barely started. George. You arranged for movers while your mother was on the operating table. Ethan looked at Michael. A coincidence. Michael nodded again. Perhaps. He pulled out another document. Then what about the locksmith booking? The expression on Ethan's face subtly shifted. What? The one you hired. I don't know what you're talking about. You booked a lock replacement for 11 a.m. George. No, I never did. Michael closed his folder without arguing. I see. He simply made another note. That measured response terrified Ethan far more than a direct confrontation would have. Michael wasn't debating him, he was documenting his contradictions. Rebecca spoke softly. Why would anyone change the locks while Aunt Marjorie was in surgery? No one answered. George. Lauren slowly turned to her husband, Ethan. He set his jaw. What? Did you hire a locksmith? No, you just denied it. I didn't hire one, He stumbled over his words. I was just looking into options to change all the locks on Mom's house for security? For whose security? He had no answer. The room sank into a dead freeze. George. Right then, the front doorbell rang. Everyone glanced toward the foyer. Nancy stood up. I'll get it. Less than a minute later, she returned. Standing beside her was a middle-aged man carrying a small leather tool bag. I recognized him immediately. Thomas Reed, the locksmith. He looked directly at Ethan, then turned to me. Finally, he spoke with quiet composure. I believe I owe Mrs. George. Whitfield an apology. Every person in the room stared at him. Thomas took a deep breath. I'm the locksmith hired by Mr. Whitfield. No one said a word. He instructed me to replace all exterior locks while his mother was undergoing cataract surgery. Lauren covered her mouth. Rebecca slowly set down the paper she had been reading. Harold stared hard at Ethan. Thomas continued. He told me Mrs. George. Whitfield suffered from memory loss and claimed she wouldn't understand the work being done. I believed him at the time. He looked at me. Until I called to confirm the appointment. The entire room seemed frozen solid. Then Thomas added one final sentence. The woman on the phone was sharp and completely clear-headed. So I canceled the order. George. For the first time that afternoon, no one was looking at me. Every set of eyes turned onto Ethan. For the first time since this nightmare began, he had nowhere left to hide. Following Thomas Reed's statement, the suffocating silence felt heavier than anything I had experienced. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for a glass of water. George. Even the old grandfather clock in the dining room sounded louder than usual. Each tick marking another second, Ethan failed to offer an explanation. Thomas remained by the door, his leather toolkit sitting by his feet. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, he said calmly. Mrs. Whitfield's lawyer contacted me a few days ago. asking if I would be willing to clarify what happened. Orch. I agreed because I believe people deserve to know the truth. Every gaze remained pinned to Ethan. He looked first at Lauren, then at me, and finally shifted his eyes toward Michael Lawson. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Michael crossed his hands calmly. In that case, you should have no trouble clarifying the facts. I've already explained. Orch. No, Michael countered. You offered an explanation. Facts, however, are indisputable. Ethan abruptly stood up. I don't have to sit here and be interrogated by you. No one is interrogating you, Michael said. You are free to leave whenever you wish. That answer caught Ethan off guard. He had anticipated a heated argument. Orch. Instead, Michael casually retrieved another folder from his briefcase. Before you make your decision, the attorney continued, I would like everyone to see a complete timeline. He laid several enlarged documents across the dining table one by one. Hospital admission records, the cataract surgery schedule, the locksmith confirmation sheet, and the moving company's work order. Orch. Each page was highlighted with color-coded tags. Michael pointed to the first page. Mrs. Whitfield checked into Riverside Surgical Center at 7:03 a.m. He turned to the next page. Surgery began at 10:19 a.m. Next page. Movers signed in on Maple Grove Lane at 10:41 a.m. Harold leaned forward. You mean while Marjorie was still on the operating table, they arrived? Precisely. Orch. Michael placed another sheet beside it. The locksmith appointment was set for 11 a.m. Rebecca slowly shook her head. There is no way that's a coincidence. Michael offered no opinion. Instead, he pulled out another paper. This is the authorization for work signed for the moving company. He turned it to face the room. At the very bottom sat a familiar signature. Ethan Whitfield. Silence. Orch. Lauren stared at the paper for seconds before confronting him in a whisper. You hired movers? Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. You told me they weren't coming until next month. They were supposed to come next month. You lied. I thought. No. Lauren's voice turned sharp. You looked me in the eye and swore you hadn't hired anyone yet. He looked away. Orch. Michael pushed another folder forward without rushing. This might answer another question. He opened it to reveal photos taken by Nancy, each stamped with a time and date. One picture showed Ethan directing two movers toward the garage. Another caught him personally carrying a frame containing family photos onto the truck. A third showed him beside a stack of labeled boxes. Orch. Rebecca frowned. Why were you packing family photos? They could get damaged. That's why I moved them. I was protecting them. Michael looked at him. Protecting them from what? Ethan didn't answer. The lawyer continued, perhaps this document helps. He displayed the inventory manifest prepared by the movers. Orch. Every item loaded was registered. The oak rocking chair, the china cabinet, family photo albums, military medals belonging to Robert's father. Even a wedding dress stored in my upstairs closet appeared on the list. I stared at that page in disbelief. I hadn't even realized it was gone. Lauren slowly covered her mouth. Oh my God. Michael said softly. These were not emergency removals. Orch. They were organized, documented, and deliberate. Ethan finally lost his patience. Fine. I hired the movers. Everyone turned back to him. But I wasn't stealing. I was protecting my mother. Protecting me from what? I asked quietly. He let out another heavy sigh. Protecting you from yourself. Those words echoed through the room. I knew you'd never agree to move. Orch. So, I just wanted to make the transition easier. Rebecca blinked. By clearing out her belongings while she was unconscious, it would be less traumatic for her. Harold looked stunned. That's your explanation? It was easier than forcing her to make a decision? I felt something shatter inside me. Not because of what he had done, but because he genuinely believed his words sounded reasonable. Orch. Michael remained entirely composed. I appreciate your honesty. But I am not finished. He pulled a USB flash drive from his folder. This contains security footage from the Collins residence. Nancy looked surprised. You got that already? I requested a copy the day after Mrs. Whitfield's surgery. He connected the drive to the television mounted above the fireplace. The video began playing. Porch. A timestamp appeared in the corner. 10:43 a.m. Everyone watched in silence. The footage clearly showed Ethan's SUV pulling into my driveway. Minutes later, the moving truck arrived. Movers carried out furniture, followed by boxes. Then Ethan appeared. Holding a clipboard, he walked through the front door with absolute confidence. In one clip, he was even laughing with the foreman. Porch. Another clip showed him pointing to the second floor, and another showed him opening the garage. Finally, the last clip showed him standing near the front door, talking on his phone. Though there was no audio, his body language projected total control. Rebecca looked horrified. "You acted like you owned the house." "I was managing the move." "What move?" she asked. Aunt Marjorie never consented. Porch. "I knew she would eventually." Lauren turned to him slowly. "Did she ever say yes?" Silence. "Ethan." She repeated the question. "Did your mother ever say yes?" "No." A collective wave of relief seemed to pass through the room. That was the first direct admission everyone had heard. Michael made another quiet note. Then he looked at Thomas Reed. "Mr. Reed." The locksmith stepped forward. "Porch. I brought something from my toolkit." He pulled out a carbon copy work order. "I keep paper records of every job." He handed it to Michael. Written across the top were the details of the booking. "Replace all exterior locks. Install digital keypad locks. Provide 4 programmed access codes. Special instructions. Homeowner away during medical procedure. Coordinate exclusively with Ethan Whitfield." Porch. Lauren stared at the paper. "What is this?" Thomas answered gently. "Those are the written instructions your husband gave me." She looked at Ethan in utter disbelief. "You asked for access codes?" You weren't just changing locks. You were ensuring Mom could never step back into this house." "No, that wasn't." "Then why set up 4 access codes?" He had no answer. Porch. Michael addressed everyone gathered around the table. "Mrs. Whitfield is the legal owner of this property. No power of attorney exists. No court has declared her incompetent. No medical evaluation has diagnosed her with memory impairment. Yet, during a scheduled medical procedure, arrangements were made to clear her property, replace her locks, and draft housing placement paperwork." Porch. He paused before continuing. "These are not assumptions. They are documented facts." A complete silence descended upon the room. Then, unexpectedly, Lauren spoke. "I need to ask one question." She looked directly at her husband. "No lies, no excuses, just answer me." He gave a weak nod. "When exactly did you decide to do this?" For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Porch. Then his shoulders slowly slumped. "It wasn't a single day," he said, his voice barely audible. "It started months ago." My heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. Months. Not days, not weeks. Months. I kept looking at the house. I kept thinking how much easier everything would be if maintenance stopped. Porch. Lauren finished the thought for him in a whisper. "If Mom wasn't living here anymore." Those words hurt more than every forged document, more than every piece of missing furniture. Because they confirmed the brutal truth I had been desperately denying. This was never an impulsive mistake. It was a carefully nurtured plan. Michael quietly closed his final binder. Porch. He didn't need another document, nor did he need another witness. Under the weight of Ethan's own admission, every lie had collapsed. As I looked around my dining room, I realized that everyone present finally saw the exact same truth I had uncovered on the morning of my surgery. And the only person who still failed to grasp the full consequences of his actions was Ethan himself. Porch. After Ethan admitted the scheme began months ago, nobody spoke. The room felt far smaller than it had an hour earlier. Afternoon sunlight poured through the dining room windows, illuminating dust particles floating lazily in the air. I found myself staring at those specks, thinking how strange it was for something so ordinary to exist while my family fractured around me. Porch. Lauren broke the silence first. She slowly pushed her chair back and stood up, her eyes never leaving her husband. "Months?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the hardwood floor. "I can explain." "No." Her voice cracked. I've heard enough explanations today. I asked you one question. When did this start? You answered. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. Orch. I just wished that answer had been different. For years I knew Lauren as someone who avoided confrontation whenever possible. If tension arose at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas gatherings, she was usually the first to change the subject. But not today. She looked like a woman whose entire understanding of her marriage had completely crumbled. She turned slowly toward me. Orch. Marjorie, I am so sorry. I reached across the table and gently took her hand. I know you had no part in this. She nodded immediately. I swear I didn't know. I genuinely believed Ethan was trying to help you. So did I. Heavy tears rolled down her cheeks. When he talked about retirement communities, he always made it sound like you were considering it too. Orch. He told me you wanted to lighten your load. He said you asked him to look into options because maintaining this big house was getting too hard. I squeezed her hand. I never said those things. I know that now. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I should have asked you directly. Michael let the moment rest before speaking, Mrs. Orch. Whitfield. He addressed Lauren. There are some things you ought to see. He handed her several financial statements that had been resting inside one of the binders. I didn't intend to discuss these today, he admitted. But circumstances have changed. Lauren frowned. What are these? Public financial records and documents legally gathered during our inquiry. Orch. She scanned the first page, then another. Her face drained of all color. What is this? Michael answered carefully. Years of personal debt, default notices, loan delinquencies, and pending judgments. Lauren looked at Ethan in shock. You told me those business investments paid off. They almost did. You said the loans were cleared. I was handling it. She kept reading down the page. Orch. There are 6 credit cards here. I thought we only had 2. Silence. Michael spoke again. There is also a letter of intent indicating creditors are preparing to initiate collection lawsuits. Lauren slowly set the papers down. How much? Ethan remained silent. How much? She repeated. Finally, he answered in near whisper, around $480,000. Orch. That number seemed to drain the last remaining strength from Lauren. Rebecca gasped softly. Harold leaned back in disbelief. Nancy silently crossed herself, and I just stared straight ahead. Nearly $500,000 in debt. I knew nothing about it. Lauren closed her eyes. How did it come to this? He rubbed his forehead. It wasn't one thing. Orch. After the logistics company expanded, I invested. It failed. To cover the losses, I borrowed more. I refinanced. I thought the market would recover. But it never did. Michael remained expressionless. So eventually, you concluded that your mother's house could solve all your problems. Ethan looked at him. I never meant to hurt her. Michael didn't respond. Instead, he waited. Orch. Eventually, Ethan continued. If I sold the house, his voice caught, I could pay everyone back. You were going to sell it, Lauren whispered. I thought Mom could find a smaller place and live comfortably. I finally spoke up. You never asked me, because you would have said no. Did my wishes matter at all? For the first time in months, he looked straight into my eyes. Orch. I couldn't lose everything. His answer was raw because it was true. Incomplete, but true. For the first time, I wasn't looking at an ambitious son trying to manipulate his aging mother, but a terrified man drowning in mistakes he couldn't fix. That realization didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained why he chose to sink deeper instead of asking for help. Michael leaned forward. Orch. Ethan, may I ask you a question? He gave a weak nod. Before deciding to remove your mother from her home, did you ever consider that she might have voluntarily helped you financially? Ethan gave a bitter smile. No. Why? Because she never would have given me that much money. That response surprised everyone. Michael tilted his head. How do you know that? I just know. Orch. I slowly stood up. You never asked me. He looked ashamed. Yes, I made the decision for you. I took a deep breath. You decided my home was worth less than your debt. His shoulders sloped. I didn't view it that way at the time. I know, and that is precisely what scares me the most. Silence blanketed the room once more. Orch. Eventually, I walked over to the hallway cabinet, retrieved an old photo album, and set it open on the dining table. The first photo showed 8-year-old Ethan standing proudly under the maple tree after helping Robert build a birdhouse. The second showed his high school graduation. The third captured the day Robert handed him the keys to his first used pickup truck. Orch. Every milestone, every memory. I pushed the album toward him. Do you remember these? He nodded. Of course I do. Do you remember what your father used to say? Tears filled his eyes. I didn't wait for his answer. He used to say, money can always be earned again. But character, I paused, once ruined, is nearly impossible to rebuild. Ethan covered his face with both hands. Orch, for the first time all afternoon, he offered no self-defense, no arguments, no explanations. He just wept. Not loud wails, but quiet, shuddering sobs, like a man finally breaking under the weight of a secret too heavy to carry. A part of me wanted to cross the room and wrap my arms around him. Orch. But another part remembered the moving truck, the forged signatures, the locksmith, and the calculated plot built around my surgery. Love and heartbreak can coexist. That was the hardest lesson I learned in my life. Michael gently closed his notepad. I believe we have established what occurred. Harold looked at him. What happens now? The lawyer answered honestly. That depends. On what? Orch. On whether Mrs. Whitfield wishes to pursue all legal avenues available. Every eye turned to me. I knew what Michael meant. Forged signatures, fraud, misrepresentation, potential civil claims, and possibly a criminal investigation, depending on what law enforcement concluded. A single word from me could alter Ethan's future forever. I drew a long, slow breath. I need time. No one argued. Orch. I have been Ethan's mother for 42 years. I cannot stop being his mother in a single afternoon. I looked directly at my son. However, I cannot pretend this never happened either. He nodded through his tears. I understand. I'm not sure you truly do. He lowered his head again. Michael gathered the binders. I will move immediately to protect your legal rights. Orch. No further actions will take place without your explicit authorization. I thanked him. As everyone slowly prepared to leave, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The confidence Ethan carried when he entered my home that afternoon had vanished. In its place stood a broken man, facing consequences he could no longer escape. Orch. While I still didn't know if our relationship could ever be repaired, one thing was painfully clear. The largest debt Ethan carried wasn't owed to banks or creditors. It was the trust he had drawn down from his own mother, and unlike money, I wasn't sure trust could ever be repaid. The following Monday morning began quietly, almost too quietly. Orch. For nearly a week, my life had been consumed by phone calls, evidence, legal documents, and painful conversations. Waking up to a silent house felt strange. I stood in the kitchen brewing coffee, watching morning light filter through the leaves of the maple tree. Robert and I planted nearly 40 years ago. Orch. For the first time since my surgery, I stopped thinking about what Ethan had done and started contemplating what would happen next. At 9 a.m. sharp, Michael Lawson arrived carrying another leather briefcase. Unlike previous meetings, he said, his expression serious but calm. We are moving into the next phase. What does that mean? I asked as he took a seat at the table. Orch. It means we are no longer gathering evidence. We are protecting you. I poured him a cup of coffee. Have you spoken to anyone since Sunday? I've been on the phone almost constantly. With whom? The moving company, the title office, the locksmith, your insurance company, and an investigator from the financial crimes unit at the county prosecutor's office. Orch. Those last few words made my stomach knot. I never wanted Ethan treated like a criminal. Michael nodded. I know. That's why I am being extremely cautious. I am providing facts, nothing more. He opened his briefcase and retrieved several folders. The moving company was remarkably cooperative. They had no idea you hadn't authorized the move. What did they say? The foreman was deeply upset. Orch. He assumed Ethan had your full consent. He even offered to move every item back free of charge. I felt a small sense of relief. What about my belongings? They are safely stored in a climate-controlled warehouse. Nothing was sold, nothing was discarded. I closed my eyes. Robert's rocking chair, my mother's china cabinet, the family photo albums. They were still safe. Porch. Michael offered a soft smile. One problem resolved. He opened another file. The locksmith also submitted a sworn statement. I expected as much. Thomas Reed has been very helpful. He even kept every text message Ethan sent him. I looked up. Text messages? Michael nodded. Dozens of them. He handed me printed copies. I slowly read through several exchanges. Must be finished by 2 p.m. Porch. Homeowner is away. Please communicate only with me. If she calls, do not disclose details. Every phrase tightened the knot in my heart. There was no misunderstanding. Everything was planned. Everything was calculated. Michael quietly retrieved the papers. These texts establish intent. Combined with hospital records, he paused. They carry significant weight. Porch. I looked toward the living room where the space Robert's favorite chair, usually occupied, sat empty facing the fireplace. What happens next? The county investigator requested copies. Will Ethan be arrested? Not necessarily. Cases like this rarely move that quickly. But an official investigation has begun. The word investigation echoed through the room. Porch. I had spent 42 years protecting my son from scraped knees, broken hearts, and hard consequences. Now I could only watch as those consequences unfolded, even while my instincts screamed at me to stop them. As if sensing my thoughts, Michael spoke again. Marjorie. Yes? You didn't create this situation. I know. If you had known. His question caught me off guard. Porch. What do you mean? If Ethan had come to you honestly from the start, he crossed his hands. Would you have helped him? I answered without hesitation. Of course I would. How much? I don't know. But I would have tried everything I could. Michael nodded. I thought so. Late that afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived. Pastor Samuel Brooks. Porch. He stood on my porch holding a small basket filled with homemade muffins from church members. I hope I'm not intruding. Never. I invited him inside. I've heard enough rumors to know not to believe any of them. I offered a weak smile. Thank you. I wanted to hear from you directly, not through gossip. We sat in the living room for nearly an hour. I told him everything. Porch. Not every legal detail, just the human parts, the betrayal, the fear, the confusion. When I finished, he remained silent for a long time. Finally, he asked, Do you hate your son? The question caught me completely unprepared. No. Are you angry? Deeply disappointed, more disappointed than I've ever been. But hate. I shook my head slowly, no. Pastor Brooks smiled gently. That matters. Porch. Anger tells us something is wrong, but hate blocks us from healing. I don't know if healing is even possible. I don't know either, he said, looking at the row of family photos lining the mantel. But healing doesn't always mean putting everything back together exactly the way it used to be. Sometimes, it means building something genuine out of the broken pieces. Porch. Those words stayed with me long after he left that night. Later that evening, my phone rang again. It was Ethan. For a few minutes, I seriously considered letting it go straight to voicemail, but in the end, I answered. Hello? His voice sounded completely different from before. The confidence was gone, the rehearsed composure stripped away, leaving behind nothing but pure exhaustion. Mom. Porch. I'm here. I heard the investigators contacted the moving company. Did they? I assume Michael set that up. He did it to protect me. A heavy silence stretched between us. I deserve it, he said quietly. I didn't offer a response. After another long pause, he asked softly, Can I tell you something? Go ahead. I haven't been able to sleep. I haven't slept much either. Porch. I keep hearing Dad's voice. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? When I was 16, he said with a faint, bitter laugh, I smashed a neighbor's mailbox and lied, saying someone else did it. But Dad knew the truth. I remembered that. Robert hadn't yelled or raised his voice back then. Porch. He simply drove Ethan over to the neighbor's house and waited in the driveway for him to go up to the door and confess. He told me something that day, Ethan continued. He said, "Every lie turns into another debt. Either you pay it back yourself, or someone else has to pay it for you." I closed my eyes. I remember. I forgot about that. No, Ethan, you didn't forget. You just ignored it. Orch. Another long silence settled over the line. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words should have brought relief. Instead, they brought a deep sense of sorrow. Because an apology couldn't turn back the clock. It couldn't erase the forged signatures, and it couldn't undo a carefully calculated betrayal. "I believe you're sorry," I said truthfully. "Orch. But being sorry doesn't change what actually happened. I know. I'll cooperate with all the investigations. I won't fight it." His voice cracked. "I don't expect you to forgive me." After we hung up, I stood alone in the kitchen, looking out the window at the maple tree. The leaves swayed gently in the evening breeze. Orch. Robert had once told Ethan that strong trees don't survive storms by avoiding the wind. They survive because their roots are planted deep in the earth. Our family had just been hit by a devastating storm. Now only the strength of our roots would determine what could still stand tall. Before I went to bed that night, Michael called one last time. "I have one more update for you." "What is it?" "Orch. The moving company returned everything today." I walked out into the living room. Robert's rocking chair sat firmly back in its place beside the fireplace. The china cabinet was carefully positioned back against the dining room wall. The family photos were returned to their spots. The house felt like a home again. Almost. Orch. Because even though every piece of furniture was back where it belonged, one crucial thing was still missing. The unconditional trust I had once placed in my only son. I was beginning to understand that once certain things are removed from a home, you can't simply move them back in. By August, my life had finally settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Orch. It wasn't the rhythm I had shared with Robert. Nothing could ever replace that. It was a quieter pace, built on genuine peace rather than hidden anxiety. My recovery was going remarkably well. At my final checkup, Dr. Simmons smiled after completing the examination. "Read that bottom line for me." Without wearing glasses, I looked across the room and read without hesitation. "ZKPFR. Orch." He laughed out loud. "Perfect! Your vision is actually better than it was 10 years ago." Walking out of his clinic that morning, I paused in the parking lot and looked up at the late summer sky. The edges of the clouds looked sharper than ever, the trees were a richer green, and even the tiny veins on each leaf were impossibly clear. For weeks I had been reflecting on the poetic irony of it all. Orch. The cataract surgery hadn't just restored my eyesight. It had forced me to look at my life in a completely honest, unfiltered way. Some truths were painful, but others brought a profound sense of freedom. Michael insisted on updating all my legal documents, while everything was still fresh in our minds. Orch. If someone exploited a legal vulnerability once, he explained, we have to eliminate any chance of it happening again. So we spent nearly 2 weeks reviewing every single document tied to my estate. Robert's original declaration of residential trust remained intact, structured exactly as he had designed it. Orch. Michael simply added a few extra layers of protection. A designated healthcare proxy chosen by me, independent financial oversight, an annual legal review, and mandatory notice requirements before any potential property transactions could occur. Everything required my direct, written approval. Nothing could ever be set in motion behind my back again. Orch. For the first time since Robert passed, I felt truly secure. Not because I expected another betrayal, but because I finally understood that hope and sensible safeguards could exist side by side. One Wednesday morning, Michael handed me the final folder. "That covers everything." I smiled. "I think Robert would approve." Michael chuckled softly. Orch. The estate plan he put together was better than what most attorneys draft. I don't doubt it for a second. As I stood up to leave, he paused. "Marjorie." "Yes?" "I've been practicing estate law for over 30 years. I've seen inheritances ruin sibling relationships, parents sue their children, and kids abandon their parents. He looked at me thoughtfully. Orch. But I have never seen anyone handle a situation like this with such absolute dignity. I felt a bit embarrassed. I didn't always feel dignified on the inside. What you feel and how you act don't always align. His words echoed in my mind all the way home. A few days later, Nancy knocked on my front door holding 2 pairs of gardening gloves and a small trowel. Orch. You've been neglecting your flower beds, I smiled. I've been a little preoccupied lately. Well, today we fixed them. For the next few hours, we pulled weeds, trimmed the rose bushes, and replanted several flowers that had been damaged when the movers rushed across the yard. The physical labor felt surprisingly therapeutic. There, Nancy said proudly, wiping her brow. Porch. Now it looks like your garden again. I looked around at the front porch, the towering maple tree, the flower beds, and the white picket fence Robert used to repaint every few years. Everything looked familiar again. Not completely unchanged, but beautifully restored. Later that week, Pastor Brooks invited me to share a few words at the church's senior fellowship luncheon. Porch. I don't need you to go into the painful details, he assured me. I just think people could use some encouragement. I hesitated. I'm not much of a public speaker. You were a teacher and a librarian for 40 years. You'll do just fine. Standing in front of nearly 60 retirees, I found myself speaking words I hadn't planned in advance. Porch. When our trust is shattered, I said, looking around the room as several people nodded, our natural instinct is to build a massive wall. I offered a gentle smile, but a wall keeps out the good things along with the bad. So, instead of building a wall, I decided to build a wiser door. The room grew completely quiet. I still choose to trust people. I just ask more questions now. Porch. I still love my family deeply, but I no longer confuse love with surrender. After the talk, dozens of people walked up to me. Some gave me warm hugs, while others quietly admitted they had faced similar betrayals. One woman whispered that her nephew had cleared out her savings account. A man shared that his daughter had quietly refinanced his truck behind his back. Porch. I realized my experience wasn't an isolated incident. That awareness brought a heavy sadness, but it also reminded me how important it was to speak the truth openly. One afternoon, while volunteering at the local public library again, a little girl struggled up to the desk carrying 3 thick books that were clearly too heavy for her. Can you help me? She couldn't have been older than 8. Porch. Of course. What are you looking for? I'm looking for stories about brave grandmothers. I couldn't help but laugh. That is a wonderful category. Together, we searched through the stacks. Porch. Watching her skip away with her pile of books, I suddenly realized how much I had missed that place. The quiet conversations, the smell of paper, and the simple joy of helping someone find exactly what they needed. Life was moving forward again. Not backward, but truly forward. Even Sophie, my 16-year-old granddaughter, started visiting more often. Porch. Her parents had temporarily separated while Lauren figured out her next steps. One Saturday, while baking chocolate chip cookies together, Sophie asked softly as she measured the flour, "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Are you going to be mad at Dad forever?" Children always ask the hardest questions. I don't know. You don't know? I know I was deeply hurt, and I know I still love him. Porch. I'm just still figuring out what to do with everything in between those two feelings. She nodded thoughtfully. I miss how things used to be. I do too. She looked around the kitchen. Grandpa would have known what to do. I gave a bittersweet smile. He usually did. What do you think he would say? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. Porch. I think he would remind us that making a terrible mistake doesn't have to define a person's entire life. But refusing to take responsibility for that mistake certainly can. Sophie smiled softly. That sounds just like Grandpa. It really does. After she left, I walked into Robert's old study. The black leather binder was sitting safely inside the locked filing cabinet. Porch. I opened it again, not because I needed another legal document, but because I wanted to read his handwritten note one more time. This time, one particular line resonated deeply. Facts are kinder than assumptions. For weeks, I had been focused on the facts that proved Ethan's betrayal. Now, a different set of facts was impossible to ignore. Despite everything that happened, I was still standing. Porch. I still had my home, my health, my friends, my faith, and my independence. The people who truly loved me had stayed by my side through every painful moment. The betrayal was real, but it wasn't going to be the story that defined the rest of my life. Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the maple tree, I sat on the porch swing with a warm cup of tea. Porch. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs, and the distant sound of children laughing echoed down the street. The familiar sounds of Maple Grove Lane wrapped around me once again. For the first time since taking that unexpected call from Thomas Reed, I realized I was no longer waiting for the next crisis to strike. I was simply living my life. Porch. And after everything I had been through, that ordinary life felt like one of the greatest blessings I had ever received. It took nearly 3 months before Ethan asked to see me again. He didn't call out of the blue. He didn't show up on my doorstep, and he didn't ask Nancy to mediate. Instead, he sent me a handwritten letter. That alone told me something had fundamentally changed. Porch. Ethan had always preferred quick fixes, phone calls, emails, rapid text messages. Sitting down to write a letter required time, reflection, and patience. I took the envelope into the kitchen before opening it. His handwriting looked different, not because the letters had changed, but because the script no longer looked rushed. Mom, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. Porch. If you never want to see me again, I completely understand. But there are things I need to say to your face, not through attorneys or over the phone. If you're willing, we can meet wherever you feel comfortable. No arguments, no excuses, just the truth. I carefully folded the paper and set it next to my coffee cup. I stood by the kitchen window in deep thought for nearly an hour. Porch. Nancy came over later that morning. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence and then looked at me. Of course, the leather binder hadn't saved me on its own. Neither had the legal trust, nor the documented evidence. The honesty of a stranger mattered, Nancy's loyalty mattered, Michael's legal wisdom mattered, and my faith sustained me. Porch. But before Robert passed, he had left me one final quiet gift. A reminder that love should never come at the expense of common sense. Before going to bed, I walked to the front door one last time. I inserted the new key into the lock, turned it smoothly, and listened to the solid, reassuring click. Then I looked around the home Robert and I had built together. Porch. Every room held a memory. Every photograph told a story. And every wall stood as a reminder that a home can never be measured by property values alone. It is measured by the lives protected inside it. On the morning of my surgery, I thought I needed medical help just to see clearly. What I didn't realize was that the biggest blind spot in my life had never been my physical vision. Porch. It was my naive belief that love alone could shield me from betrayal. Now my sight is completely clear. I still believe in human kindness, I still believe in forgiveness, and I still believe family is worth fighting for. But I also believe that boundaries and sensible precautions are acts of love too. Sometimes, the strongest lock isn't the one securing your front door. Porch. It's the one protecting your independence and self-worth. Now, every time I unlock my front door, I remember the phone call that was supposed to lock me out forever. Instead, it guided me back inside, with clearer vision, a resilient heart, and a profound understanding of what home truly means.